they called it a calf strain. I feel like my calves are always strained, and so I'm constantly freaked out that I'm going to tear my Achilles at any time. Even though it's rare, I'm an old man. Welcome back to another episode of Past Your Prime, the podcast for active adults balancing training, rehab, family, and real life. I'm Alex Kiker, Spiker Kiker on Instagram, pro volleyball player, busy dad, and recent gym rat. I'm here with my buddy Craig. He's a physical therapist and life professional. What are we going to talk about today, Craig?
Well, today we're going to dive into one of the injuries that I think scare people the most that do explosive sports, the Achilles tendon rupture.
So this was my idea. We are a couple of weeks out from the NBA season ending, and we're in just this terrible time of year where there's not really many sports that I enjoy watching, unfortunately.
What sports are on right now?
I think tennis, baseball. I like going to baseball games, but I don't know. I was just never good at baseball, so
There's too many games.
There is a lot of games.
But going to the games is pretty cool. I really enjoys the Atlanta Braves because they were on national television for a really long period of time, like WGN or something like that, so you could actually watch them all the time.
Yeah. Cool.
Anyway,
yeah.
Just so you guys know.
But we're more diving into the NBA, which has a little bit longer of a season. So we'll just talk about the NBA Finals really quickly as a preface. 3 Achilles tendon ruptures in the NBA Finals. Most notably, well, actually, all 3 of them in the finals were like top tier players, top 20 players in the league.
Who were they again?
So we had Damian Lillard, I think, for the Bucks. We had Jason Tatum for the Celtics, and then probably most notably Tyrese Halliburton for the Pacers in Game 7 of the NBA Finals. And I watched his several times.
Goes the Achilles. You watched it over and over again?
Yeah, I'm a spotty NBA fan. If there's games on, I'll usually turn them on. I usually, unfortunately, have Bluey or some other children's show on the TV at any time at home. But
they don't typically have Achilles tendon ruptures in those shows.
No, none at all. Not really anything athletic at all at any of those shows, and that's probably why I don't enjoy them, but my kid likes them, so they stay on the TV. But back to Mr. Halliburton. He had a calf strain in Game 6. A lot of commentary in the NBA about why he tore his calf in Game 7 came on the preface of that calf strain. And so we were talking a little bit previous to the podcast this morning, and talking about our calf strains, and maybe doing heavy calf raises, a way to help mitigate potential Achilles ruptures. And then why so many high-level athletes are getting Achilles ruptures. We looked it up, and there have been 45 Achilles ruptures in the NBA since 1990.
Was it 1990?
Yeah. The 90-91 season. So that's what, a good 35 years with 45 ruptures. 7 of those ruptures happened this season in the 24-25 season.
Shocking.
So a massive uptick. The NBA is definitely throwing some dollars at researching why these things are happening. And then just to throw some more statistics out there, in sport generally, about 50% of Achilles ruptures across all sports come from basketball. So hopefully Craig will be able to help kind of just walk us through what's really going on. I think we'll talk about fatigue.
I wonder if the NBA is going to throw money at us after we finish this podcast.
That would be great.
Yeah, they probably will listen to this podcast and go, these guys have figured it out.
Because I know we have a lot of NBA professionals listening to this podcast.
It's actually our number one demographic, NBA pros. That's great. Wow. Okay. I mean, I think that what we're talking about here is the Achilles tendon rupture. We didn't even jump into this, but what I always find interesting when I look at these more serious injuries, there's a term called the dynamic recursive model. And the idea is that you have an athlete with intrinsic factors, and then you have them do an activity with extrinsic factors. They do the activity over and over again, and most often they never have that massive injury. And the Achilles tendon rupture is one of those injuries that most people with calf strains are never going to have an Achilles tendon rupture, right? And even when we went and dug through the injury history of the 7 people this year, he was the only one with a calf strain.
Right.
And so out of that 7, most of them did not have any injury that would have indicated that they were at risk for this happening
There were 2 that had ACL tears.
in their history.
Halliburton had the calf strain, and then the rest of them pretty much had a
Nothing.
clear, at least from a major injury standpoint.
Which, when you look at it like that, that's one of some of those things you look to see if an athlete is predisposed to the injury. And to me, there's not solid information for those people who are out there saying the calf strain was the driver. I mean, I would be interested to know how many of the people in the NBA finals had some level of calf tightness or strain.
And with the amount of games you're playing every other day or every second day, your high level players are playing a majority of the game. And there have been so many notable NBA players. We talked about Kobe, KD. There were another handful that have had this injury, but those are some of the top players in the league.
Yep.
Who, in our discussion, like, I'm sure those guys are in the gym constantly, not taking an off season, which we'll jump into a little bit, but I'm sure all of those things kind of play into these injuries.
And your question is, so why are we seeing more?
Right.
Why are we seeing more of these ruptures, especially in these elite athletes? The interesting part is, if you can't look at, if you have like these type of like really rare one-off events, even though the frequency is higher in this season, overall there's not that many. 45 in 30 years, we're looking, what, 1.5 per season. We want to prevent it because the people that's happened to have been high caliber players worth millions and millions, if not billions of dollars to the franchise they play for. And I think that part's just important to note, that you're trying to figure out an injury that gets thousands of exposures without it causing an injury. And so then what we were talking about is, then you go to the mechanism of injury. That's actually very consistent how people are rupturing it.
Well, and to have a 4 to 5 times higher occurrence in one season
says something.
Yeah, definitely says something.
So the mechanism, what that means is, like, what is happening when the rupture actually happens? And there's a very consistent movement pattern that we're seeing, which is the person is making a drive or a push off. Their hip is fully extended when they do the push off. Their knee is fully extended, and their ankle is maximally dorsiflexed. And that position, you get no support from the glute max. You get no real support from the quad, and you get rapid lengthening of the plantar flexors and maximal dorsiflexion. And so in that position, the Achilles is basically getting no support, and then it's getting somewhere 12 times body weight through the Achilles tendon right when the rupture happens.
And that's a movement that I was a youth basketball player all the way through high school, and then kind of gave it up when I got way better at a different sport. But why is that specific movement pattern so risky when, kids are doing it from the time that they're 5 years old?
Well, I think there's a couple things that are happening. So first off, not only that it's that position, it's that it's happening in people with specific body types who have extremely long levers. So even though I said 12 times, their levers are even bigger. These guys are huge and they're really lanky. And so the level of force that they're generating is probably even higher, but it's the fact that it's maximally dorsiflexed that I think is the biggest issue. And I would even say in those individuals, it's how rapidly they're transitioning that's basically exposing just a single passive structure, the Achilles tendon. And I say passive structure, it's not a muscle. It's not producing its own force. It's going to store force and it's going to release it elastically. But your Achilles tendon is basically just being exposed, and it's the only thing that's going to be able to resist the force. And it's because in like youth athletes and people who are younger, I don't think they're producing a similar level of force, and they're also not doing it so far into a season with massive levels of fatigue. And my concern is that they've also collected a lot of secondary issues that don't often get caught. So these hidden inhibition issues or subclinical pain issues that they're just kind of pushing through. And I don't think you're going to see that in your youth athletes.
Well, yeah, these NBA players are so strong. They've obviously got world class athletic training, yet are still getting this injury. And part of it, I would say, is, if this was a regular season game, Halliburton probably wouldn't have played with a calf strain. That's probably one where you sit out. But game 7 of the NBA Finals, same thing with Lillard and Tatum. Any playoff game is, such high risk versus reward that you're going to take the risk.
Well, we know the serious injury goes up during competitive play compared to practice.
Right.
And even in championship games or games like that, we also know that the risk for significant serious injury goes up. That's a well-known fact. So I think it speaks to what you're saying. But what I find really interesting around it is I don't know if that movement specific way that it's happening, where it's fully dorsiflexed, I think that happens when the body is fatigued. And so when you get to the end of the season and in that situation, I think you're going to have more risk of it. And I also think you're going to have it early season. You're going to have greater risk because you're not in playing shape. And I think you'll put yourself in a more risky position. So even though it's a common position that you see in basketball, probably more so than almost any other sport, especially with those body types, I think it's going to be more frequent at the end of the season, at the beginning of the season, which is where we saw the majority of the Achilles tears this year.
Although one of them was the first game of the season.
Yeah, so undertrained.
Yeah.
Yeah, so new.
And 3 of them were Indiana Pacers this year, which
Indiana.
What is your training program doing
That is
to beat your guys up so much? But interesting, weird correlation.
Well, we had said that first, and you're like, well, you did get to the championship though.
Yeah.
But good luck next year.
But so did Oklahoma City, and none of their guys blew out Achilles this year.
Yeah, it is an athletic position that's really frequent, but I don't think it's often trained. And so I don't think it's trained the way that we would want it trained, because you don't want that ankle fully dorsiflexed, knee fully extended, with the hip fully extended, where you can't use the muscles to help control and produce force and do force absorption, where then you just basically only can load the Achilles tendon. So I don't think it's trained well enough with an understanding that that is a mechanism of an injury, that the frequency is super low. So you have to train yourself to never go into it, even when you're fatigued.
How does fatigue play into this then?
I mean, fatigue. So the way I would look at this is very similar to the way that we look at ACL research. So the ACL is our anterior cruciate ligament, and it's one of those ligament tears that costs sports and people tons of money, pain, and time. And it's really, really high risk positions, non-contact, high risk positions that cause the injury to happen. So it's somebody cutting and their knee goes into a valgus position, which a valgus position just means that the knee dives in. So if somebody's cutting, their knee dives in and they try to push off and they load the Achilles tendon, it pops and it gets torn. It is one of the most researched ligaments or injuries that any injury, it's one of them that's been researched the most because of how significant a tear of it is. And like I was saying before with the dynamic recursive model, most people will do sport over and over again and they will not have an ACL tear happen. But when it does happen, it's so significant to people's ability to ever play again at the same level that we never want there to be one.
Right.
Very similar to Achilles tendon ruptures, which clearly Achilles tendon ruptures are even less frequent than ACL tears.
Kobe and KD are some of the few that I recollect being able to come back and play at a similar level. I know Kobe did some crazy things. I'd assume KD did,
of course,
things too, in terms of overseas,
like drugs.
Yeah.
like they did drugs. They may have had somebody.
They got the alien technology.
Well,
peptides or whatever they were doing.
KD is so lanky. Like
right. Well, and it's interesting, like you had talked about like the length, but like I don't see a Damian Lillard as a lanky person, as where Halliburton and Tatum a little bit more on the lanky side, but still both very well trained. Tatum's a super strong guy. I follow some of his stuff, and his weight training is world class. But
so it's not just strength. Yeah. And I think that the fatigue piece, though, where I kind of got off track, though, is that when you get fatigued, you go into those risky positions more. So for example, if you're pushing off, you're going to see an increase accumulation of those types of positions. So if you think of a person producing emotion, and let's say when you're fresh, you don't often get into that position where your ankle's fully dorsiflexed, knees fully extended, and your hips fully extended when you're trying to make a fast cut.
Hmm.
Most often, you're going to be a little bit more flexed in the hip. Your knees going to be slightly more flexed, and you're going to be more in a neutral position when you produce force, which is what you actually want to do to get maximal force production, because your hip extension torque is going to help you push off faster. You're going to have more quad engagement, and you're going to have the foot in a position where you get maximal calf load without putting the Achilles tendon in a dangerous position. But when you get tired, what do? You sit back, you're on your heels. Even when you're trying to produce some athletic motion, you're going to basically be in that position, and so you're going to see an increase in frequency of the people being in the risky position, and then on top of that, they're fatigued, so the muscles are not going to be firing as well, so that you're basically going to be rapidly increasing the frequency of those types of positions.
And I've never played in an NBA game. Have you?
Not today.
No. But I'd assume those guys, especially in a game seven of the finals, are giving 120, 150% of
Mhm.
their, practice level effort to get by an elite defender and things of that nature.
Which I think also then drives the fact that you're going to have, we've talked about inhibition multiple times, and that's different than muscle strength. So muscle strength, like I could take somebody who has a 10 out of 10, like they're incredibly strong with me testing specific muscles in their lower extremity, and then we fatigue them, and we should see that they can't produce the same level of force. That's one thing. But then the other thing is that you can get inhibition that's driven by other injuries. Like you'll get glute max and glute medius inhibition, which will help absorb force and produce force. You'll get inhibition in those muscles during the course that's faster than what the muscle's actually fatiguing.
Mm-hmm.
And those stabilizers in the quad, these other muscles, they will not fire as well, and it'll be faster than what it should be based off of fatigue. And then I think you put on top of that, these people are highly trained. They know what they want to do. They're going to produce the movement even if they don't have the optimal muscles to do it. And then boom, I think that's when they have the tear.
Yeah, especially because you're not expecting to tear your Achilles on any given day, even if your calves are a
No,
little bit sore or strained or whatever that
no,
may
if you're betting, if you're putting a bet down, your bet's that nobody's going to tear their Achilles tendon. You don't only have 45 Achilles tendon tears. And that's what makes this so difficult, is that you can have maladaptions that every time that you go through the activity, your body's either going to be better or it's going to be worse at handling the next level of activity that you put through it. And what I think is happening, especially as it goes on throughout the course of the season, they're having maladaptions that then is going to light them up and turn them to the wrong pathway where they have a major injury.
not good.
Not good.
You had kind of put a comparison to throwing or shoulder injuries in the shoulder and or elbow. What did you want to talk about there?
Well, one of the areas that I think have been most researched around, we call it the kinetic chain. And there was a researcher, I think he's an orthosurgeon as well, talked about the kinetic chain, the Kibler kinetic chain. And the idea is that when you do force production, you can have energy leaks that then cause the distal end to be overloaded. And the most famous one that's been looked at is pitching.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're producing a pitch and you have an energy leak where you can't transmit force that's produced from your core, your lower extremity up towards your arm, you basically will cause too much forces to happen at like the shoulder or the elbow. The most common injury that you see that in is a ulnar collateral ligament, which is famous because if you tear that, you can't throw the ball. And so pitchers will get ulnar collateral ligament injuries, and then they have the Tommy John surgery.
Right.
And so if you have that injury, you may not make it back and play as well as you did before, even though it's crazy to talk to sometimes to young up and coming pitchers who think that they just need to get through their first Tommy Johns. It's wild. They'll kind of say like, just looking to get it tightened up again. Don't do that. That's an insane way to insane way to think. But if you think of it, the Achilles tendon is very similar to the ulnar collateral ligament in that if you're not absorbing force well and producing force well at the proximal structures, meaning like your glutes, your quads, and you're not able to basically use those well, you're going to amplify the force that has to be handled at the Achilles tendon. And once again, it's not strong enough to handle the overwhelming force that you can produce, especially in a compromised position where it's fully elongated.
So like
It's
toe
fully lengthened.
towards knee position.
Towards knee. Yep.
Yeah. And I've seen both, that like either having too much ankle mobility or not enough ankle mobility can lead towards Achilles tears and other injuries.
My concern is always too much in this type of a situation. You know, having done some rehabs where people lost integrity in their Achilles tendon, you have to let it stiffen back up. And if somebody has no limit to their ankle dorsiflexion, no passive support, it just makes it even more important that the calf and the Achilles tendon are really, really strong.
All righty. Yeah. Quick recap. So Achilles tendon ruptures aren't random. They almost always happen in predictable, super high risk positions with hip extension, knee near full extension, and the ankle dorsiflexion like we just talked about, usually during explosive takeoff and or deceleration. These positions aren't generally very rare in sports. They're part of a normal movement, especially in basketball. The problem is fatigue, or where parts of the kinetic chain break down and all that load then shifts to your Achilles tendon. If you haven't yet, feel free to throw us a subscription, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. It's free. It helps us grow the podcast, and we would appreciate it. Next up, we'll dig into what's missing clinically before these injuries happen. We'll talk a little bit more about calf strains, especially related to Mr. Halliburton, and why the foot, Craig's favorite part of the body, might be overlooked in this puzzle.
I love feet.
Stop it. Don't say that. I love
feet.
Stop saying that.
I love feet. I think the other big thing in the recap, though, is that they're really rare.
Yes.
They're very, very rare. So even though 7 sounds like a lot this season, that's still incredibly rare to happen to you. So just remember that.
But don't blow out your Achilles.
But also don't blow out your Achilles.
Okay. What are we missing clinically before an Achilles rupture?
Well, when Alex and I were talking about this subject before recording today, I have not heard anyone talk about subclinical signs that lead to inhibition. The most common ones being if you have a low back irritation, that can make it so your glute medius and your glute maximus do not fire well. Previous history of ankle sprain, which can cause glute inhibition. It can also cause lower leg musculature to be inhibited and dysfunctional. And then knee joint irritation or swelling can cause the quad not to fire correctly, cause the quad to basically turn off. Those are all inhibition issues that I think are so common, especially in high level sports, but it can happen in almost any sport. And I think inhibition is such a common issue in these lower extremity muscle injuries, and no one checks for them.
Give me a quick definition of inhibition again, just for any new listeners out there.
Inhibition means that you have normal muscle strength. If I was going to test you before you do an activity, you would test normal. Inhibition means that there's something wrong with the ability for your nervous system to make the muscle fire. So you have a change in what allows the muscle to act appropriately, but your muscle strength is normal, right? So you can do things to check for inhibition. So for example, if I check somebody's glute medius strength, the way I do that is I lay on a table on their side, and then I'm at their knee, and then I'm pushing down as they try to push up. Okay. And so as they're pushing up, if I can shove that down using force, like an appropriate level of force, they'll show weakness there, but it's not actually weak. And so then what I do is I'll do something to cause them to activate the muscle. I come back to it 10 seconds after testing it, after doing this reactivation technique, and now it tests normal. That shows that muscle was inhibited.
When Craig does this test on me, he can lift his whole body weight on my leg while I'm on my side.
Yes.
Last time we checked, it was really strong.
It should be really strong. Now, so say I test that on him, and then he goes and jumps 20 times and comes back to the table, and I do it, and he can't resist me at all. That's inhibition, because he wouldn't have fatigued. He didn't have an injury. It's literally that his nervous system cannot make the muscle fire the way it's supposed to. That's inhibition, and there's numerous things that cause the muscle to be inhibited. I do not think those are being tested for in any level of rigor during a sports season or during a game or during an activity. And some of these people who absolutely have had ankle sprains. I mean, NBA, that's one of the most common injuries. Back pain is incredibly common in basically the human race. If you're human, you're going to have some level of back strain or stiffness. And oftentimes people will think, oh, it's just my back's tight. You could just have an issue that is actually hurting you. It's actually really funny how often I'll have people who come in and they'll say that they've never had back pain. And then I'll be, as I'm going through the stuff, and they'll start to show stuff that's wrong with their back. And they'll go, well, I mean, it hurts. It hurts daily, but I didn't know that's what you meant. It's like, yeah, that's what I meant by it's a problem. You have back pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
my back
funny.
hurting?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a human. Yeah.
Right.
You're human. But I think that those are such common issues that we just miss it. It's such a common problem though.
So for the Achilles, would you be testing for calf inhibition specifically, or?
Oh, I check for the whole chain because any one of those can cause it to be overloaded, right? If you have quad weakness, you can overload the Achilles tendon. If you have glute weakness, you can overload the Achilles tendon because your body will compensate and make up for it. Like let's say you're a runner. If you're a runner, you won't stop running with this issue. You'll just keep on. You will stop running if you rupture your Achilles tendon. But I mean, if you have an inhibition where a muscle's not firing well, you just work your way around it. You'll start to do things like run with your knee straighter. So you do we call it a peg leg gait or a pirate gait, where your knee is completely extended and you just basically smash your knee joint, and it's because you can't fire your quad. Those are such common problems. And if you add on top of that, you have to do an explosive movement. It's not surprising that you can be overrepresented in people who have these subclinical signs.
And running, sprinting especially, puts such a high load through your Achilles. What was it, 15 to 18
15
times
to 18
body weight when
It's the
doing a
most.
full-on sprint?
Yeah. Which is important to remember though, because Achilles tendon ruptures don't happen in sprinting, even though that's where maximal load is. The key difference is your ankle's fully dorsiflexed. If your ankle's fully dorsiflexed, it doesn't take as much load.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about the calf. This was widely reported in Halliburton's Achilles tear that he had suffered a calf strain, which by definition is a minor tear all the way to a full tear, I think.
It's one of those terms that can be non-specific.
Yeah. Either way, he was having some sort of calf issue. They called it a calf strain. I feel like my calves are always strained, and so I'm constantly freaked out that I'm going to tear my Achilles at any time. Even though it's rare, I'm an old man, and old men are the people that typically
You're so old. Well, you know what's funny? The thing that sucks about some of these terms, like calf strain, is because they're non-specific, you're not exactly sure what they mean by that. So you can have tightness that they'll call a strain. And that tightness can be, like we've talked about, it can be neural irritation. It can be a referral. It can be a joint that's irritated. It can be something that's changed the muscle threshold where it fires at, so it's too low when it's turning on too much. It can be compensatory where the calf is getting overloaded because the quad got shut off or the glute got shut off, where the calf is now having to do more activity. And so when they say strain, it's actually not helpful.
Or you've torn your calf muscle.
Or you have a tear in the muscle, right? Like you could have a tear, but if you had a tear, then you would definitely be having some level of pain and some level of awkwardness around the muscle. So I really would want to know, like, okay, what did you mean by strain? Is it just that it feels tight? Okay. Is it that there's bruising and you actually had a tear? Okay. Is it more that there's a tendinopathy at the Achilles tendon where there's now pain there, and so that pain is causing some level of stiffness in the soleus or the calf? I don't want to know those like very specific things, because the term calf strain to me could be so many different things that I don't think it's useful for being predictive of if you're going to have an Achilles tear.
Yeah, I was just hyper focused on it, kind of the whole game 6 and game 7. And, I kind of live in this world of a constant calf strain, calf tightness, calf pain, whatever you want to call it, that it's always just kind of there in the background for me. And so I saw like he was wearing a calf sleeve during warmups and then was not wearing it during the game itself. And I don't know if that played into it at all, but like I didn't see any bruising or anything significant. When I fully tore my calf, I actually had almost no bruising at all, which was
it swelled though.
It swelled quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like normally, I've seen a couple other, minor calf tears before, and like their leg turns black, and mine for whatever reason didn't.
But I think that's why you have to be so specific, because if you think about your own case, when you have tightness, sometime at the beginning of your comeback after you tore it, that tightness, part of it was related to the tear.
Right.
So you can feel tight in that position because it was torn. But then you had excess swelling. And if you remember, once we flushed it, like we did what's called MLD or manual and back drainage, it felt dramatically less stiff, but it was still painful.
Yeah.
And then a year after that, you start having this other symptom, and that ended up being nerve. And so you can have these like different things that are driving it. And the reason that specificity matters is because your response to it is super, super important, or else you can't reduce what's causing the risk related to the strain. Which, so say the muscle is compromised. Okay, well, the muscle's compromised. We need to do something to help support the calf, which would be like a heel lift in the shoe. So you literally can't go into as much dorsiflexion because the calf can't prevent it. Or we need to coach and make sure that he's not pushing off on the left side. Like those would be two different things. Versus, let's say it's the joint that's irritated or his back that's irritated. We got to treat those things, which then will take a load off the calf. And then the calf strain, the calf tightness is actually the key sign that Halliburton should have been monitoring. Hey, if you start to feel a buildup of calf tightness, we got to get you out and we got to treat your back. Or, hey, you start to feel tightness in your calf, you got to come out. We're going to traction your knee and make sure the knee joint's actually handling load well. Because if you don't do that, if you don't address the actual issue, you're shifting the burden towards the symptom, which is, okay, he feels tight in his calf. Let's put the calf sleeve on. And now it's feeling warm. We think it's better, but it's really, he was just being physically active, and his nervous system was blocking the signal from getting to his brain that it was an issue still. So if you don't have a good key sign, which I think was probably his biggest issue, he had no idea that he was probably getting greater and greater risk of tearing the Achilles.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, if this was just regular season game, he probably would have just sat it out and done some recovery and maybe prevented it from happening. But given the circumstances, I don't see a scenario where a
He
high
wasn't gonna
level
play.
athlete doesn't play.
Well, no, but I guess it's not so much them saying that he wouldn't even though if he wouldn't have sat up, but let's say even in the scenario where he's just at practice. My concern though is that in somebody like him, he can compensate so well and has such a high exercise capacity that if you don't have a really good key sign and a really good understanding of like the underlying foundational problem, how is he going to know that he's at risk?
Right.
And I think it is missed that there is such a strong interaction between what's happening up the chain to what's happening lower at the Achilles tendon, and that you can overload it and not even realize you're overloading it.
So I think that gets into like what should we be checking or rechecking or key signs that we should be monitoring for in any athletes, but more specifically with the high level athletes.
Like this that have been tearing so often. I mean, the most obvious one is you've got to be checking for joint diffusion. Any level of swelling in any of the joints in the lower extremity, but specifically the knee joint. The knee joint's very, really easy to check for joint swelling. And as soon as you have a little bit of swelling, that causes the joint. It's called arthrogenic inhibition, but joint related inhibition. So the joint's irritated, it causes the muscle that crosses a joint to basically be turned off. So any swelling, we want to at least know and then make sure that those muscles are being reactivated throughout an activity, because they can basically turn off the muscle without you realizing. If you have a history of back pain, I think you have to be constantly rechecking active range of motion of your spine and maybe even checking neural tension positions. Neural tension test, all they check for is mechanosensitivity in the nervous system. And all that means, mechanosensitivity means either compression or tension to the nerve. You want to know if you have that. And if you have that, that can also inhibit your musculature and your ability to fire your muscles. That's what you have.
Right.
Right. And that's one that we talk about all the time. And what do you do?
Neuroflossing.
I mean, it's simple.
Yeah.
It's simple.
I also had some of the joint diffusion a couple of weeks ago with my knee, maybe a little over a month and a half ago, and the pain is resolved. There's no more swelling, and my quad seems to be firing better.
I do think that most people are very surprised by how often I catch joint diffusion in them, like joint swelling. If you run, if you do dynamic activity, at any point that you feel knee stiffness, it would not be surprising to me if you have swelling in your knee joint. It's incredibly common. And it's very easy to do to yourself. There is no way that these guys aren't having joint diffusions multiple times. Yeah. I think it's super common, and I think it's really underchecked. It is so underdiagnosed.
And pretty easy to see. I mean, literally to the naked eye. Look up a brush and sweep test online, and you'll see.
It's a little.
Yep, and a little bubble of fluid pops up in your knee, and it looks a little bit gross to me, but at least you know it's there.
I think the other one that needs to be checked is key signs once the person's fatigued. So key signs would be muscle strength for all of the lower extremity muscles that absorb force. So glute max, glute med, quad, pretibials, calf. Those need to be checked before you play, and they should be checked during the course of playing. The way I always recommend doing it is have those muscles basically activated as part of your warm up. And if you feel a side to side difference, that's enough to indicate something's going wrong. So if you all of a sudden feel like, oh, my calf raise on my left side feels way harder, that's an inhibition sign that you should go, oh, let me just double check that this doesn't get worse throughout my playing. Right. They should feel normal. If you feel a side to side difference, that's a concern that should be thought through and understood what the hell's happening. You also need to do those tests again once you're fatigued, because the fatigue will change how your nervous system fires your muscle. And so if you only do it at the beginning, that's not good enough. And I think I've told you before, but I've had before where with runners where it's like mile 6 or 7 where the inhibition moment happens, but it is so obvious when it happens. And it typically precedes the onset of symptoms. And that's like the key thing, is that a key sign will give you feedback before you put yourself into a horrible place.
I think that's a harder one, at least in our work together, to test, because I've generally not been able to get into a true fatigue state here in the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
It would be, coming in after a game or something like that. We just haven't had the opportunity to do that. But like for an NBA athlete, like you should immediately be going to the training staff afterwards, and hopefully they're assessing for these things.
Yeah, how we typically do it in the clinic is that we will have the person either run or do the fatiguing event before they show up, and then it's easy to catch. I will sometimes go to people's games and catch it, especially if it keeps on happening. But oftentimes they come in, and if they're rested, there's no exam finding.
Right.
Everything tests normal. But then you go and you watch them, and they're like, well, it's my 4th game. And at the 4th game, you find, oh, you have a massive single-sided inhibition response.
Yeah.
We treat whatever was causing it, and then it tests normal. I think those are literally not on radars right now, and not being done at all.
I just remember you trying to have me do infinity calf raises, and it's like, we're not getting there, man.
No. And that's the thing, is like, we knew that you weren't, because it was still hurting and not feeling right.
Yeah. And
that's why you keep on retesting. You don't assume that you have the right issue, because there's so many different symptoms that people can experience that there's multiple causes for those symptoms. You actually want to get the root cause of what's causing it. You don't want to just treat the symptom.
Got it. You wanted to chat a little bit about the foot. Don't spend too much time here. Don't get too excited.
I know. I guess, man, we're kind of getting long on this anyway, right? So the foot core, there's a concept called the foot core that was brought up, it was like 2015 by, I think it's McEwen. I have to make sure I got the right name. But it's an interesting idea. We've all heard of the core related to spine stiffness, making sure that all the muscles around your low back fire really well. The foot core uses a similar premise, and really you can kind of think of the core as anything that crosses a single joint, that causes stability, that allows the larger movers to basically use that stability to produce force. The foot core means we're talking about the plantar intrinsics. So that's going to be your abductor hallucis, your flexor torn brevis, your abductor digiti minimi, which is one of my favorite
about
muscles.
Those before.
Ooh, the ADM. Those muscles firing really well. They create a stable platform for all force that gets produced proximally. Like, so all the force that gets produced at the hip, the knee, and the ankle. If you don't have a good platform to work from, you can have an energy leak without even realizing it. Once again, when you have an energy leak, something else has to compensate and take up the force that's not either getting absorbed or produced, and that can overload a structure. And so foot core is just something I want to put on people's radar. There's so many great ways to work on it, ranging from toe taps to short foot to toe yoga. Those things are just really, really useful ways to start to build your plantar intrinsic base, which we'll get into more specifically in another episode.
Cool. I think we also wanted to just talk about kind of like basketball not having a real off season anymore, all the way from youth athletes to your professionals. So does overtraining play a role here?
Well, I think overtraining plays a role in every sport, because I think what you just said happens all the time, and it's something that we've already harped on a few times in our podcast. Are you recovering? Do you do recovery? Do you take a week off and let your body actually heal from the stresses that you put on it? Are you actually thinking about, hey, is my body need some time off to recuperate and have a super compensation event where you can actually accumulate all the gains from the stresses you put on it? I don't think that happens often enough. I don't think enough focus is put onto it. I think people do a lot of lip service to saying that they do, but I don't think that's happening. I definitely don't think it's happening in youth athletes. And with these cases that we're talking about, I think people learn to basically constantly push. I think we have a hustle culture that doesn't embrace how important letting the body recover is. And that's unfortunate. Of course it played a role.
I'm guilty of that. I went to the beach last week or 2 weeks ago and really should have just enjoyed a week off, but I was on the beach and said, I'm just going to go for a run. So ran a nearly 10-minute mile barefoot on the beach in the sand, and it just destroyed my legs. I was limping around for like the next 3 days.
What hurt?
My calves, my tibs, my ankles, my like it just blew my whole body up. And I think there is something about running barefoot, running in the sand, doing it at faster speed than I've ever done before that definitely played a role. But yeah, sometimes just taking a week off, and it's just that training mindset that like
It's hard to get out
you
of.
can always continue to do something to get better when maybe the thing you need is just a week off and some actual R&R.
I wish I could be inside your brain sometimes when you make decisions. Like I'd like to
It
just
seemed
hear
like
the
such a good decision in the moment. You know, you see all these folks just running on the beach, and it's like, I can do that. Like, I'm just going to run to the pier and back. It happened to be a mile. I happened to do it in just over 10 minutes,
beautiful.
and it happened to destroy me almost wholly.
Well, you got good mental recovery, which I think is equally important.
Yeah.
However, I think the body also needs to be treated in a similar vein, as in there's times where you want to push, sometimes when you want to recover. You probably didn't realize that that was over pushing.
Right.
It was a novel. It was a novel activity.
But I think the point here was that, you know, NBA players are playing all year. We talked about some of the best players in the world having this injury, and they don't want to take a day off. They want to be in the lab getting better day after day. I think we can say that for almost all sports out there. You know, we talked a little bit about the NFL. They're one of those sports that has a true off season. You know, you're not going and playing in the CFL during the off season to continue getting reps. You're, you know, working on your body and actually preparing for the next season. But I know my volleyball athletes out there, you're playing year round. You might be training on the days that you're not playing, but you're rarely actually taking time off either from your training or from your sport. And I think that can be said for most athletics these days, where there's much less of an off season. I don't think sports are doing a great job in terms of being able to prioritize recovery. Some of it is, like Craig said, getting inside my brain. If I stop playing my sport, I'm going to get worse at my sport, and I generally think that that's true. And so it gets really difficult to prioritize rest, recovery versus training, and continuing to build yourself up.
Don't you think that there's a big piece of that is just learning what stuff really overstresses your body? Is like, say you want to work on skills. Is there a way to take some of the stress away from the body when you're working on skills? Things like that. Or is there a way to look at if you want to push your skill set, are there other things that maybe are just less stressful to the body? And then combine that with what are your signs that you're overtrained or you're starting to feel stale and need time to let the body recover. The most obvious one is you start to catch injuries. You start to feel like every time you move, you feel bad, or you just don't feel fresh. It's hard to get up in the morning. Your heart rate, your resting heart rate's higher than it should be. There's all these signs of overtraining. But my favorite one to look at is if you start to feel crappy and then it seems like injuries just linger and you just feel terrible, you probably need systematic recovery built into your program and you need it for a while. When I feel the worst, I start to do 2 weeks on, 1 week off, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. My big key sign is mental fatigue. If I start to feel really stale, really mentally tired, that's when I know that if I keep training at the same level that I have been, I start to catch injuries. And it's such a consistent, constant thing that I've seen in my history that I make sure I have recovery built in. And it's really common in most sports that I'll see people don't have that ability. And it's first, they don't recognize their exercise capacity. They also don't recognize what you're saying, which is I have a mental driver that thinks I'm going to get worse. Just recognizing it and letting yourself recover.
Yeah, I'm certainly guilty of that. And sometimes I think doing something is better than doing nothing, but not always the case. My last thought, specifically with these guys that tore their Achilles in the playoffs, I think, and I could be wrong here, but I think all three of them played for Team USA this past offseason.
Tatum, Halliburton, and Lillard. I think
Yeah,
you're right.
I think at least two of them did.
I'm not sure if Lillard did.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Lillard did, but I wonder if I know that's a big strain on the body, and NBA players have in the past opted out. I think it was just before this offseason that we won the Olympics, right?
I think so.
Curry
Yeah,
with the crazy performance.
yeah. He was flying insane.
Yeah, he like lost his mind and just went automatic.
I'm not sure if Tatum played at all though.
I don't think he played very much. Yeah,
Tatum was on the bench, which is nuts. That dude is so good.
But yeah, I'm sure that's certainly
recovery. I mean, I think that's what LeBron James does so well. This is why he's one of the best players ever play.
Sure, but not the best. Anyway, kind of getting to the end here. What do you think athletes and or coaches should do differently?
Number one, you need to know the mechanisms. 100%. You need to know the mechanisms that the highest risk injuries or the highest debilitating, longest to recover, season-ending injuries. You need to know what those mechanisms are. I think the one for ACL tears is really well understood. It's knee valgus, like in cutting motions. It's why it's getting trained so extensively. You want to know that for the Achilles tendon rupture, it's going to be the ankle fully dorsiflex in a push-off position with the knee fully extended and the hip fully extended. You don't want your athletes doing that, and you want to make sure that you train the hell out of that, even in fatigued situations.
And that's like going for a basketball drive, basically. Yes. You're driving to the hoop, you're getting into a lower position, your knees fully extended, your ankles fully dorsiflexed, and you're pretty low to the ground, and it's kind of putting that momentum through the chain where a lot of load is going into the Achilles.
We did not look at volleyball, but I would assume volleyball, you had mentioned it before, it might be going for a dig.
Yeah.
Pushing off from one leg. Those would be really important to know. So it's very obvious in basketball, and I would almost put money down it's going to be obvious in other and different types of sports, probably going to be a similar mechanism where the ankles fully dorsiflex, knees extended, hips extended. You need to know those high risk mechanisms, and then you need to train it so that even in a fatigue state, that's not ever happening, and you need to be monitoring for it. You'll see that there's certain athletes who are predisposed to doing that over and over again. I kind of think of it like somebody who drives crazy. They're cutting people off, all of those things. They may not have a wreck for a really long time, but they're always going to be going through and doing things that put them at risk for having a wreck. It's the exact same thing with this type of an issue. Next one is you need to be checking for key signs. The most obvious key signs for this one are going to be looking for joint swelling, looking for muscle inhibition, looking for anything that's causing subclinical symptoms of like increased tightness. Definitely want to own if there's things with pain, and you want to look for inhibition events. Those inhibition events are so common. They just need to be built into your routine. So halfway through a practice or halfway through your loading, and this goes for anybody doing sports. If you're a runner, you want to be doing something probably halfway through your run to check that you're not having the inhibition. If you're playing sports and you're doing basketball, halfway through, you should be rechecking. It's not about a warm-up, which I think sometimes warm-ups do a disservice because you think that that's the only time it's important. Hey, I'm staying warm the whole time. That's not the issue. It's that inhibition is so common. You need to be doing your reactivation halfway through your sports performance. If you catch one side is not working as well as the other, you just had the inhibition event.
Right.
It's important to know that. Next one is you just got to look for changes in your control and your strength that if all of a sudden you can't control things when you're doing an activity and it's not, it could be fatigue related. You need to know that your motion and the way that you're producing force is changing. Just note that that's actually happening. That's good for a coach to be able to monitor and look for. And then, yeah, finally, you got to look at the whole system, the lower extremity as a system, and think of it from the standpoint of a kinetic chain. You want to have a really solid, stable foundation with your foot core. You want to make sure that proximal stability and strength are still present in your glute max, your glute med, and in your quad. And your calf has to be incredibly strong. And you also need to train the tendon in very, very stressful positions. We always say it has to be over 90% of your maximal voluntary isometric contraction to get the tendon to actually increase in size and stiffness, which we didn't even get into with this. You have to train at those loads, which means things like sprinting. If you're somebody who's going to be doing a lot, you probably want to get into the point where you can do sprints, build-ups, because in those situations, even though it's a high load, it's low risk.
We were thinking of getting into a little bit of sprint training ourselves
Yeah.
because we're both maybe undertrained in that.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
It is an 8-week buildup, in my opinion. If you're going from minimally trained to being able to fully sprint, an 8-week buildup.
All right, let's add it to 75 hard for
We're
you.
going to add it to 75 hard, which is going well. I am 3 weeks in.
Yeah, we haven't been in the studio together for about 3 weeks. So follow up on the last episode, which is coming out this week. Good to know that you're sticking to it. Well done.
Boom. Love it.
All right. Well, I think that does it for episode 31 of Past Your Prime on the Achilles. If there's one thing to take away, I would say that Achilles ruptures don't happen because someone wasn't strong enough. They happen when that force absorption system fails, whether that's from fatigue, inhibition, poor foot control, or missed follow up and not checking your key signs after you have some pain there. So if you're coaching or training hard, don't just focus on performance. Look for those signs of compensation. You need to continue to recheck your systems and then training that load absorption and not just the force output. If this episode helps shift your perspective, make sure to give us a subscription. It's free. It helps us grow the podcast. We truly, truly appreciate it. Leave us a review. Make sure it's 5 stars, but leave us a review. We love getting that feedback as well. But only positive feedback.
Because we're sensitive.
Yeah. And if you want more, head over to pastureprime.com, join the community, get access to our content, future programs. We've got some cool tools and articles there as well. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, follow, share. And we'll see you on the next episode.
PYP, baby.
Peace.